This attempt to set the stage is for me, a moment to step back and say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? And for me, those three questions, who has rights, what rights, and against whom, they are questions that I have not answered. I don't think that tax scholars have answered, and in not answering them, we have done a disservice to people who, like Ignacio, like the groups who try to achieve rights-based litigation and campaigns and so on. We're doing you a disservice by not answering some fundamental questions about who has obligations to whom in this world. And so in my recent work, I'm trying to think about the question of justice and fairness and equity, they're cognates in some way, to understand how our failure to ask the fundamental questions about who has rights have caused us tax policy quagmires that we haven't been able to solve. And I think the reason that this is so important to me is that I think if we do not start to solve this problem of who has rights against what rights and against whom, that income tax is not going to be sustainable. If we can't say who should be paying what tax to whom as a matter of obligation and duty, if we can't express that thought and give us some standards to work with, then the income tax becomes something that we can no longer defend. For its basic framework was to be the one tax, the promise of this tax, the one tax that could fairly distribute the burdens of living together in society on the basis of ability to pay. And if we can't figure out what society means, and if we can't figure out who's supposed to be in the pool of people who have obligations to each other in society, then how can we possibly say that we're measuring ability to pay properly, that we're allocating obligations properly? And so if we can't answer the question of who belongs to whom and who should be able to make a claim over whom, then I think we're in trouble. So I'm not going to answer those questions. I'm going to tell you that I have failed to answer those questions. And I think after a century of thought about the income tax, most of my tax tax academic colleagues would agree with me that we have all failed to ask and answer these questions. So my first question for myself is, well, who owes what to whom starts with the first who. Can we at least tackle that? Who is a very odd question because it implies a human. And I think I'm going to make a provocative statement and say that humans have rights, but states don't have rights. States have powers, and they exercise them in our, as representatives of us, of humans. And so I think with power, obviously comes obligation and duty. And this is where I want to say two things about this relationship between the state and people that I hope that we'll be able to explore a little bit more over today and tomorrow. The first is that activism is about being vigilant about the relationship between people and the state. So that when I see protests, I say, the people in the streets are telling us there's a problem. They don't necessarily know the solution. They're showing us there's a problem. That fact of protest is telling us there's a breakdown in the relationship between people and the state, and they're the illness, they're the symptoms, that there's an illness. And we, in the world of policy change and legal change, we have an obligation to notice that and respond to it. That's our job, to see it as a sign that something's gone wrong, and we have to do something about it. So activism, even though it's messy and we get frustrated with activists, with what are you guys talking about, what are you doing, protesting, we sort of think it's sort of chaotic, or it's too targeted, the name and shame is one guy gets punished and the other guy goes free. Even though all of those things are true, we who sit back and be reflective about law and policy development, we have an opportunity to see that, okay, these people are expressing a problem and we have to respond to them. What are we going to do? So watching activists move the ball for us and move the field for us in academia is a sign that we're not doing our job and we have to do our job better. We need to be responsive to what's happening in the world around us. And the second thing I want to observe about the relationship between states and people is that there's everyday familiarity with the idea that we're talking about states as citizens. And when that's our vocabulary, it's masking the fact that taxation has never been about citizenship. It's been about people who you can control as a state. And that every state in the world taxes people who are not its citizens. And every state in the world has to figure out why they get to do that. And we, as the people, have an obligation to make sure that we have answers for those questions. Why is this multinational not paying tax in that country? Does that multinational belong to the country, or does it belong to some other country? If we can't answer that question, we have a really hard time explaining, as a matter of right and a matter of duty, why Starbucks should pay tax to the UK as opposed to the US or nowhere. And I think so the state-citizen relationship is a false relationship. It's state and person, and we've got to figure out which state should be claiming what people, and when people are not human, that's becoming quite complicated. It's hard to talk about rights in that context. Do corporations have rights? Only if you and I give them to them. They don't have them naturally. How could they? They don't exist unless we make a legal regime for that existence. So for me, this question about the state and the person relationship, we have not done a good job in tax scholarship really nailing that down and explaining the link between you, an individual, and a particular state, and the claims that that state can make over you, and therefore the obligations it has to serve you. And I think I have time to just say where I see this becoming mostly problematic, or an example, because this is quite abstract, I realize. I think the ready example of this is the one that Dean Brooks brought up with tax competition between developing countries or between low-income countries. When you have a situation of non-stop and ruthless tax competition, and you have poor countries fighting with each other to get foreign direct investment, we already know that the solution to this is a cartel in rich countries, a tax cartel. Oh, you're going to be upset with me when I say that, but if the US did not have deferral, then cash would not go to looking around the world for the lowest cost destination, because it would be taxed at home, where it belongs. And if we are going to talk about the US being a cartel, or forming a cartel with other capital exporting countries, then we have to have that conversation about source again. We have to say, well, if the US can have a default tax, which is going to reduce the rates to the bottom, then shouldn't the host country have a claim over that income first? Who's got the first bite? And we have to reopen 100 years of discussion about source and residence, which is a technical discussion, and a lot of people have put their minds to it over a long time and not solved it. But if we do not solve this problem, I fear that the basement on corporate tax, certainly, and on personal income tax, possibly, is cavernous and might be bottomless. That is, we're heading to zero and going beyond with the subsidies going past zero. So without a global floor, we can see that basement opening up, and we know that there are solutions, but we haven't decided if somebody has an obligation to set that solution or not. So, again, this comes to, well, who's deciding what the problems are for international tax, and therefore what problems should we be working on, and what solutions should we be finding? And here I come again to this problem, the state person. Even the state person container that I've created for you isn't right either, because we know that many, many people across the world are impacted by the policies instituted by, for example, the United States. And most of those people have no say in the policy decision-making process. None. And yet they're impacted. So we see the spillover analyses coming out, I think, of the UK, and maybe Ireland was doing one of those. Was that? Those, thank you. And there, this is intriguing, right? Finally, we are saying a state's tax policies, like its environmental actions, have spillover effects. And these are impacting people who have no chance to make a statement about what they want. and their preferences and what the law should be and what the priorities should be. So I think I'm going to be a little bit provocative and say, everyone whose life chances are impacted by tax competition should have say in how the race takes shape at minimum. Now you're going to say to me, that's not possible because we can't have a global conversation with everybody whose life is impacted by tax competition, which is to say, we can't have a global conversation with 7 billion people, and we come back to the container of the state to represent you at the international level. I think that participation is a logistics problem and it's a power problem. And we have not solved this problem because we have not tried to figure out who belongs to who has rights, what rights they have, and against whom they ought to be able to exercise them. So I'm going to stop talking very soon because I know that this panel is a little bit strange in that we didn't give time for discussion. And the reason that we didn't give time for discussion was that we wanted to move right into the first panel of the day. And I'm going to give time, my last 2 minutes, to that transition. But I wanted to just say that the reason that I wanted to set it up this way is to just start this with a baseline of questions, a foundation of where we think we want to go, and then launch right into the discussion, and where we're going to see the reports of 3 groups that have tried to do something to try to put these together. And then we can have a conversation that includes what we said here and with that panel after that in the break. So my last point is this. I think that when we're thinking about participation and lawmaking and policy making, we are told often that we have an impasse. There's too many stakeholders if there's 7 billion, right? That's too many stakeholders. We have to bring it down or we'll never get anything done. Well, the things that are being done are destructive. So not getting anything done, but fixing the process, to me, seems at least a marginal improvement over getting things done that hurt people. So I think that we should at least start thinking in the long term, what does this participatory model look like when everyone on the planet is affected by destructive tax policy? And shouldn't everyone have a say what is and what is not a destructive tax policy? I'm going to stop there, and we're going to, you're going to do your duty here to close this panel, and then we'll just hang around in the room and let the second panel come right in after us. Okay? Thank you very much.